Hi, my name is Barry Horner, and I'm your host on today's episode of Stake and Soul, the podcast that's dedicated to demystifying the world of employee ownership. Stake refers not just to the financial or beneficial ownership, but also to the vested interest, the sense of responsibility, and the feeling of belonging that comes with being an employee owner. Soul is all about company culture, the values, the shared purpose, and the human connection that are amplified and shaped by employee ownership. Soul is the company's silent language. Join us for Series 1 as we sit down with business leaders and CEOs who have successfully navigated their journey to employee ownership. So welcome back to the podcast. Today I have the immense pleasure of speaking with Kirsty Dias, the Managing Director of PriestmanGoode. PriestmanGoode is a world-leading design studio responsible for shaping some of the most visible and innovative passenger experiences on the planet, from high-end aircraft cabins for companies like United Airlines to revolutionary rail projects like New Tube for London. Kirsty has been instrumental in the consultancy's growth since she joined in 2001. A true thought leader in design and innovation, she has driven PriestmanGoode's concepts on the future of transport and has led major projects across rail and travel industries. Crucially for our listeners, Kirsty led the studio through its transition to employee ownership trust in 2016, securing the company's long-term creative and commercial future. This move, which she describes as a natural extension of the company's journey, ensures that every team member is fully invested in the future success and vibrant culture of the studio. We'll be discussing how the EOT model works in a high creative design environment, and how Kirsty is continuing to advocate for a more sustainable and inclusive future of the design industry. So with that introduction, Kirsty, welcome to Stake and Soul, the EO podcast. Great to have you with me.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Super. So maybe a good place to start, and typically where I've started with most other podcast guests, is a little bit of an intro to you. I've looked at your LinkedIn profile. French, interesting background, marketing, and then joining the studio and then making your way through that. So I think for listeners, it would be really interesting just to know, a little bit about your personal journey, and then a little bit about the company. I mean, it sounded from my initial intro and my reading of the work that you do, it's quite unusual as a firm. So it'd be good to just explore that. And then we'll move on to a little bit about what led to succession, transition, and what led you down the path of employee ownership. So maybe let's start with a little bit of your background and CV.
That's funny. People don't really ask me about that in terms of my my kind of academic background. But I did study French. I went to UCL and I did a French degree. But when I was at UCL, I actually spent a lot of my time doing theatre production. So I produced quite a lot of plays. Okay. And that was my kind of real passion. I was involved with the National Student Theatre Company and knew kind of quite early on that I wanted to kind of pursue a professional career in theatre. And so when I graduated, I spent about 3 years working in, I basically worked in a regional repertory theatre, doing press and marketing. And the thread, I think, that kind of goes kind of through my career is that I really, really love working with creative people. And so that, that kind of love of kind of theatre and of producing plays very specifically, because I wasn't a performer, but I was interested in the production side and in facilitating essentially a creative vision, was kind of present from the outset. And I actually moved from theatre into visual arts, and I went to work for the Full Barbican Art Gallery.
Right.
And again, I was interested in the creative process. And I did a similar kind of role in at the Barbican. I was the marketing manager, but I also had responsibility for commissioning graphic design, had involvement in exhibition design, and that in itself kind of gave me my first kind of taste grounding in commissioning design. Okay. And I then, after I'd been at the Barbican, I then went to the British Council in more of a curatorial role, where I worked in the design promotion unit, curating exhibitions about British design. And one of the design disciplines I picked up was industrial design. But my experience at the British Council led me to work on a big kind of trade promotion initiative called Millennium Products at the end of the 20th century, so different century, and it was kind of a big part of New Labour, and promoting kind of British expertise and innovation overseas. And through that project, which basically went to pretty much every market in the world, it was a creation of a big multi-sectoral exhibition that supported trade missions, it supported diplomatic visits, it supported royal visits in pretty much every market you can think of, brought together kind of my marketing experience with the curatorial side, but also trade diplomacy. And I had kind of exposure to that international network of embassies, chambers of commerce, consulates, and really a taste of how export works. And that's actually how I met PriestmanGoode.
Okay.
And then I went to work for PriestmanGoode in a role which was initially kind of comms based. I was head of comms, but it brought together essentially that trade and marketing experience with kind of more of the curatorial side to support PriestmanGoode's presence in exhibitions, publications, and on platforms. So talking at conferences around the world and developing content for that.
Wow, what a fascinating and varied background. So you've now joined the company that you're in. Tell us a little bit about that company, and then a little bit about your progression through that company to now be the MD.
So, as I said, I started as head of comms. PriestmanGoode is a design consultancy specialising in passenger experience and transport. And so we work across all the transport modes, but with kind of a focus on aviation and rail, as well as future mobility. We also do work in cruise ships. But we initially, so the company began at kind of the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and kind of had its heart really in traditional product design. So for the first 10 years of its life, kind of worked quite firmly in consumer products. So everything from white goods to toys to pens, kind of a wide array of product. But then at the end of the 90s, PriestmanGoode worked with Virgin Atlantic on the design of their lie flat bed for the upper class seat.
Oh, wow.
And that really kind of acted as a springboard into transport. We went on to design for Virgin Trains at that time, and then really the transport work and our expertise in passenger experience really grew from that time.
Amazing. Looking back to 2016, which is when you then became employee owned, I guess prior to that, you, others, the leadership, the owners of the business were starting to think changes in the air. Here's an opportunity to do something different. What was it, the retirement of the original founders, or what led down the track of employee ownership? I'm always fascinated to know what sort of got you to the point of thinking that was the route. And what were the other options that you were either involved with or the founders of the business looked at before they made that decision to go down the route of employee ownership?
So at the time, there were 3 directors in the company, 2 founders kind of who'd been there from really the outset, and then a third director who joined, who became director kind of 10 years into the company's history. And they, I think in many ways, were really on the front foot in terms of planning next steps for the business. So at that time, they were probably in their 50s, And although they weren't, I would emphasize this actually, I don't think it was about retirement planning,
no. Okay.
but it was thinking, I think the important focus was on the continuation of the business. So rather than necessarily about exit, it was more about creating a kind of sustainable future for the business. Because I think they recognized that they had, we do have a really kind of strong and healthy business and position in the market. And it was about, taking a long-term view to guarantee that will continue. At the time, there were kind of a number of, let's call them kind of peer companies in the same space that we're in, who had gone down the road of selling to, a larger company. And that had not necessarily gone brilliantly well for them. So there were a couple of, there were experiences kind of out there which hadn't been so positive. And so, this was particularly driven by Paul Priestman, who I think, generally is quite a progressive thinker. And he heard about employee ownership, and he kind of, in a designer way, he did his research, and he found the kind of the key expert who knew all about it to talk to, and that person was Graham Nuttall, who wrote the Nuttall report for the coalition government, and who was instrumental in putting that legislation in place around 2014, I think. And Graham is in fact the chair of our trustee board, and the company had kind of the right ingredients in place, I think, in that there were kind of quite a few although we were smaller than we are now, but there were, I don't know, probably half of the team at the time had been with the company for quite a long time.
So how many people would that be, Kirsty, at that point?
So I think at that point, but this might be my memory serving me wrong, but I think at that point we were around 40, 50 people.
Okay. Yeah.
And we are now 100.
Okay.
So we've really grown.
Remind me, in terms of your particular role at that point, were you involved with this sort of that discussion and decision? Because were you an associate? No. So, okay. So that was, you were sort of on the receiving end of, we've got some great news, we're going to go, So how did that, interested to just dig into that a little bit, how did that come across for you initially when you heard about it? Did you think, oh, amazing, exactly the sort of transition we thought in this amazing business, or was there skepticism in the business? What was I know it's going back a decade now, but what was your sort of reflections at that time?
Again, kind of part of the forward planning, and why I talk about, the forward planning and looking at the future is, I think that is a key part of what, I also should be doing now, or am doing now, is looking to the future, like who's going to be here in 10 years' time, who's going to be running this. So in 2012, so 4 years before we became an EOT, 3 of the employees, including myself, were made associate directors. And so the 3 founders had begun to kind of expand the number of people who were managing the company. And it went from being quite a small business, which was managed just by a small handful of people were involved in the conversations about the running of the business, to essentially particularly between kind of, around 2016 onwards, we have become a much more, corporate is the wrong word, but we've professionalized the way in which we operate. And that's what we've kind of brought to the business, and that has also allowed us to grow. Whereas previously it was much more kind of stripped back. It was very much around, doing the design work, which is a lot of it, and is still like the hugest part of what we do. But as we've grown, we are actually working on much more kind of complex projects, much bigger projects, which require it requires more project management. It requires a kind of multidisciplinary approach, which we've totally adapted to facilitate that growth. So in 2016, when the decision was made by the board of the three founders to become employee owned, the three associates were invited to become directors. And that invitation was part of, we are going to become employee owned. We want the board to be more representative. We want to share the running of the business with more people. It's obviously, I guess part of the sell was, this is about profit for everybody. It's about sharing. It's about securing the future of the business. But we obviously knew it was, so myself and at the time one of our associates became trustee directors.
Okay.
And we were, I guess, essentially given the responsibility of leading the team engagement, the employee ownership engagement. And we learned quite a lot from Graham. So Graham obviously kind of shared examples of what he thought, other companies were doing or what was best practice. And I think it was so important for us that we had his guidance and his steer to say, this is the expectation of what you will, as an employee-owned business, you should be doing or you should be giving back to the employees. Because I think shifting the mindset between being founder-run and employee-owned is quite a big one.
Yeah.
And so, I think maybe actually the word is having his authority to say, this is what the expectation was really helpful.
And how did that land with the team?
With the
wider team,
founding directors, with the wider team.
Yeah, in terms of the expectation.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was. Yeah, like previously we hadn't had. I mean, we didn't have bonuses previously.
Right. Okay.
Like there might have been an extra bit of cash at Christmas.
Yeah.
But there wasn't any sense of kind of formal bonus.
Right.
So that was really appreciated. And we were able to, so initiatives which perhaps might have been desirable, I think, as a creative company, like time to go and see exhibitions or time to do kind of research into what was happening, kind of trends or those kinds of things, which kind of might have been a nice to have previously. We were able to say everybody gets half a day every other month to essentially feed their creative spirit, and that will be supported as a business. So things like that, which have been, everybody used to ask for before we became employee owned, we were able to kind of bed down. We were a business that was very keen on being present at all times. And employee ownership allowed us to introduce more flexibility into that. So, without question, kind of the beginnings of our flexible working policy began at that time. And reward for long service. I think one of the early benefits we introduced was kind of additional days for long service, obviously recognizing that our team are quite long stayers. So they were the kinds of benefits we started with, but we kind of started with a handful, but we now have like a plethora.
Right. Okay. And it's interesting you put that down to being employee owned. What is that? The permissioning you get by being an employee owned business, or was it you also think new people coming in with new ideas, a different style of leadership, perhaps moving from what might have been a more founder-led business to, as you said, professionalized business. Just interested in, because I guess some of the things you've just articulated, any business could have done it. It wouldn't necessarily have to be an employee-owned business. That
is true, but we were given the voice and the agency to do it, which hadn't been present before
in the past. Yeah. Okay. Fine. So that's
because it was previously it was more like, led from these three people. So it was more top down, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And so just thinking about the journey you've been on, I'm always interested in the whole communication piece for those listening to the podcast around what does good look like and what doesn't, around when should you first tell the team. It feels like perhaps it took a while for that to sort of filter through, and the communication, would it be true to say the communication around the time of why you went employee owned and what that meant for you as the next generation of leaders in the business probably could have been a bit better? Would it be true to say?
I think probably we could have been. I think it's also worth saying we became employee owned in 2016, and I don't have the stats, but there weren't that many employee owned businesses at that time.
Sure.
So we were
in the minority.
We were one of the first. We were one of the first businesses to become employee owned under that kind of new legislation.
Sure.
I think there were two. So partly it was about what access was to information for us to become educated, because perhaps we could have been better prepared maybe as incoming directors, because we didn't know a great deal about how to, like at the beginning, how to run an employee-owned business, or what that meant in practice. But we had two good sources. I mean, we had Graham, so we had a good guide. And then we had, quite early on, we did two things, I think, in around our first year. One was Field Fisher hosted a kind of day's seminar about a report they'd done, a research paper they'd done about what employee ownership meant to millennials.
Okay.
And that was like a published piece of academic research, which they shared kind of at this day's event. And we met, and that was for Dan and I, the other trustee director, and I, who were the employee reps, went to that. And we learned masses of that event, because we learned other examples of good practice. We met other employee-owned businesses. We learned, much more about how it related, I think, to culture,
right,
as much as benefits. And I think we had a good culture anyway, but I think at the beginning, employee ownership was sold on, there's a bonus.
Right. Okay.
And, and some other benefits, but that was kind of the big thing. And then we went to the EOA conference, and suddenly we were surrounded by people or companies that might not even have enough cash to give bonuses. And so that, again, was kind of the next step on thinking about what did that mean to us as a culture, who we are, what we're doing, and what we want to do. And so along the way, we were having kind of intermittent meetings with the kind of wider team, and we did a couple of bigger events to kind of celebrate employee ownership. It seems like a long time ago now. But the communication wasn't constant. Yeah, I think it really picked up meaning during COVID, because during COVID, suddenly we had to work a lot harder at like we were meeting virtually, obviously. We were talking in very serious terms about what lockdown meant for us as a business, about how we continued to function as a business, kind of setting up all those processes, protocols to translate to remote working, which we'd never done before. And we had to communicate a lot harder. We were actually very fortunate during COVID. We didn't furlough anyone. Our work, obviously aviation was not great during COVID, but actually kind of work from our other sectors kind of sustained us and kept going. We were working on quite a lot of big projects, long-term projects, which carried us through. So we kind of survived COVID. And if you look at kind of the return, because obviously we were also paying back the founders during that time, because we actually completed we did our kind of final payout in 2024. So it took us in the end kind of 8 years, as opposed to 7, which was the original plan. We only actually missed one payment during 2021.
Okay. The height of COVID period.
The height of COVID, where we said to the founders, we can't pay you right now. But in fact, what we did do in 21-22, we made 2 payments.
Oh, okay.
So we actually caught up with them.
Yeah.
And I feel like there was much more, whereas the communication perhaps before COVID had been a bit more kind of one-sided, because I think in some ways with early employee ownership, the employees don't know what they can ask for, what's expected of them in terms of their engagement, what does it mean to be employee owned. But then during COVID, the conversations around just generally kind of working as a team, how do we do this? What does this, what does it mean? Became, I guess, a bit more solid and real. And it was maybe more of an exchange, more of an equal exchange of ideas and expertise, because we were kind of having to tackle a situation that nobody had encountered before. And there were some, so I guess difficult conversations a little bit, in that there was more kind of maybe challenge or pushback, but that was actually really good for us. And what it really, I think the reminder actually, which is a kind of constant reminder, is that when you as kind of leaders are in the position of running an employee-owned business, by this point we'd been in it for 3 years, 4 years. That's part of your everyday, of what it means to you, because you've been there for the whole history of it.
Sure.
But when you have new people joining, people leaving, actually they don't know. So you have to constantly remind people, this is what it is, this is what it means, this is what we're looking for in terms of your engagement.
And just jumping in quickly on that, that's absolutely fascinating, and I think that's right. And I can see that in our business. We became employee-owned in 2019, and we've had new joiners in the last 24 months, and it's like, what is this CEO thing? What does it all mean? How do you do that communication? What's the mechanism starting from a new joiner? Does it start literally through an induction program? Do you do town hall meetings? What's the way that you get people, that whole thing about owner mindset and getting people to think like an owner? I'm just fascinated by what are the mechanics, what are the processes that you have to go through, or what does good communication look like to enable people to get to that point? Just interested in how you do that.
I was just going to add, actually, to kind of as we were on our journey, so around that time we've got another employee rep to the board.
Right. Okay.
that was pivotal in kind of sharing the conversation a bit wider. But then in 2 or 3 years ago, we got another 2 employee reps on the board. And what that has triggered is a solid, committed program of employee engagement. And I think we were shy of that at the beginning.
Okay.
And I think in 2016, we went into it in the mindset of it's a bonus and some extra things. It's not that. It's actually about committing yourself as a business to communication.
Sure.
Between all of you, and it's not just a twice-a-year report. It's about a kind of ongoing dialogue, and I think we didn't understand that at the beginning.
Right.
But that is
really
how to
helpful.
do it successfully.
Yeah.
And obviously we know so much more than we did then.
Yeah.
But the increase, like having these 2 new employee trustee directors has meant that we have monthly meetings. We have another set of employee reps. We do have we've now actually introduced a kind of second meeting in the year, but we have kind of 2 formal meetings a year with everyone where we're reporting back on results. So more like we would report back to shareholders. And so we've kind of increased communication and I guess transparency around how we operate.
Right across the business, is that to every team member gets sight of sort of how the business is performing and how they can influence that?
We do a kind of a report, edited report of results.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How frequently do you do that, and what sort of response do you get when you do present that information? Twice a year, is it?
Twice a year, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So just quickly, the governance, which again I think folk are always interested in. The business feels like it's moved from founder-led, where it was primarily 3, to now just what's the structure at the moment? You have a main board, main leadership team, trust board, and then is there a separate sort of partner council, partner voice group?
So we have a board of PriestmanGoode Limited, which has 7 directors on it. Then we have a trustee board of 7, I think. 7?
Okay. And you sit on both, chair one,
yeah, we have 7.
And sit on the
other.
other.
So I sit on both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it the trust board's responsibility to essentially you've talked about dynamic communication, which I think is really important. It isn't just getting the team together twice a year and either telling them something or informing them about something. I like that whole way that you've talked about the change of communication. But in terms of getting information out to the team and the relationship between the trust board and the main board, how does that dynamic work?
So that's something actually we've worked on quite hard in the last kind of 18 months to formalise. And you asked me actually how do we introduce employee ownership? So I'll come back to that. But we've formalised how we communicate and how the trustee board feeds into the board meeting and the cycle of board meetings, so that there is a loop and a report out. So there's kind of constant communication between the 2 bodies. And
is there sort of cadence of meetings, sort of main board and then trust board comes later? How have you structured that?
So we just have 2 trustee board meetings a year.
Right. Okay. Right.
But the trustee directors hold an employee owners meeting once a month.
Right.
And there'll be a specific topic that they talk about each month. And then that's all reported back into the cycle.
Right.
And we're also kind of through that, we have started to do twice yearly surveys around employee satisfaction.
Yeah.
And so the results of the surveys drive drive basically the agenda for the employee ownership activity.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because it will identify areas that we need to improve in. And I was going to say, actually, what is interesting about kind of the flow of information or of areas that are impacted by employee ownership, there is much which is actually about the business.
Mm-hmm.
So it a lot of conversations or a lot of areas of interest for employee owners are actually quite operational. They are about the job, as opposed to necessarily that kind of the wider culture or just thinking about the wider culture. So we do kind of talk around those things, but we're clear. So this is from the outset. I mean, employee ownership's obviously talked about in terms of recruitment and interview process. Then when you're appointed and you're onboarded, the new person has a onboarding session, which is specifically about the company, but which incorporates employee ownership, where we explain both the history, but we also explain this is PG Limited board. These are the directors. These are the trustee directors. This is what PG Limited is responsible for. This is what the trustee directors are responsible for, so that people are clear about, I guess, what they can influence, but also if they have an idea and a plan, how they execute a plan. So we explain all of that in an induction around employee ownership.
Yeah, amazing. And when people are applying to the firm, is the fact that you're employee owned often seen as I really want to work for an employee owned firm? Do you find that? I mean, we certainly have. We're B Corp as well, and that certainly comes through at initial interviews. I mean, I guess they're talking about the culture, but the fact that we are employee owned, and they know if they join us, well, I'm not going to be standing up, or Philippa as she's taken over from now, and say, oh, by the way, we've got some news for you. Here's the company we've just sold to. Do you find that's a sort of a point that people pick up when they join the company, and a sort of selling point for your studio?
I think our culture, and so therefore employee ownership,
all that goes with it,
is a huge reason that people want to work for us. Yeah, because we work in a relatively small industry.
Sure. Yeah.
And yeah, I think people come to us want to work for us partly because they think it's going to be a nice place to work.
Yeah. So you mentioned a moment ago your post what's called, I'm not sure I'm a great fan of the idea of Financial Freedom Day, but you are post paying off your deferred consideration, which often is a bit of a shackle for a business in terms of trying to grow the business at the same time pay out the previous founders. But it feels like you've got to a good place now, paid off slightly later, but as we found going through COVID, it was difficult to maintain deferred consideration, perhaps as was planned. But as you now look to the future, what changes might you see that you're able to bring in now you haven't got that outflow of capital to the former owners? Is that going to sort of change decision making, or the way that you'll look to invest and grow the business now? Perhaps cash is more readily available.
I mean, we kind of have three pillars of retain, kind of as a guide that we share with the team, which we kind of shared maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but around retain, reward, and invest. So where we communicate kind of the need to, have some cash reserves in order to manage the business sensibly and cautiously, to be able to continue to retain people by paying appropriate wages, obviously rewarding through bonus, and then investment falls or covers rather things like training, for example. So everybody gets dedicated training budget now. But invest might also, if it were to come up, or if we were to build up our cash reserves to a degree where we could look at, if it was appropriate, investing in something, another, it might be, I don't know, a building, software, a new advance, a new, acquisition of another company, if that were ever in our plans. Not that it is, but those things, it allows us to have those conversations because we've communicated that that is our that they are our 3 pillars that are kind of our guides to how we might use our profit.
Yeah, because there's not all that many EO businesses, as we've talked about. It's still, albeit 2014, it's still relatively its infancy. And certainly the businesses that I was at an event the other day, and I would say 90% are still in that period of having to pay out the DC. So you're the other side of that. But I really like the way that you've caught that in your 3 pillars. That's really helpful. In terms of often deferred consideration is considered a bit of a, I think often employee ownership, people think retain the team, legacy, culture, tax-free status, etc. is sort of hailed as the sort of perfect solution. And I think it doesn't take long before you dig behind the scenes or you experience employee ownership to know that there are some challenges within it. And I think in most businesses, I think paying off the founders is definitely one of them. Another one that often comes up is incentivizing key people. So how do you, if you've got a relatively sort of flat structure, yes, you've got the bonus scheme, but you haven't got the opportunity for someone to have big equity opportunities. Do you think that's either, you could personalize that in your own business, does that create a challenge, or do you think more widely with employee-owned businesses that is a problem? And if it is, how might we overcome it?
I mean, we haven't, interestingly, we haven't faced that. And I think we are clear about, I think we're clear about who we are as a business. And that is about sharing the rewards. But I think one of the challenges is around kind of retention, that people stay for a long time, they stay for a long time because they really like it. And that's dependent really on growth. So you need to grow to allow them the opportunities to professionally grow. And, that has happened. I think the statistics show, don't they, that employee-owned businesses perform in that way. They often do grow faster than other companies or other structures. And, we've seen that we are growing. We've gone from, kind of that 50 to 100 that we are now. And I guess, the challenges are ensuring that you can allow the continued professional development for the people that have been with you for a long time. And I don't have the answer to that. And also, that you need to, how do you maintain the culture in a much bigger scale?
Sure.
Now, I think we're still doing that,
right?
But I think that becomes more challenging when you're 100 plus, because you're kind of moving into a different scale of business. So I would say that's something that we are grappling with now.
Sure.
Thinking about kind of next steps.
Yeah. Any other particular challenges you see in an employee business? Do you feel you have to lead it as the MD in a different way? Do you think being a MD of an EO business is quite a different skill set or task than it might be if you were in a non-EO business?
I don't know, because I've only been I've
right.
only been an MD of an EO
business. Yeah,
and I think it suits me. Yeah, because that's the way I like. It's a good culture fit for me, so it plays well for me. So I can't really answer that question because I'm not sure what I would be in another environment.
Let me just slightly reframe that then, in terms of anyone that might be listening to the podcast at the start of thinking, this is how my business is led. We're thinking of becoming employee-owned. How's that going to change? What would you say are the sort of attributes of an MD or a CEO leading a EO business? What you said it suits you. why does it suit you? What are the particular styles of leadership that you have that you don't think would be suited to a non-EO business?
Well, I think it is quite open and not that hierarchical. So, and that it's not just me. It's like the rest of the board are similarly, like particularly the new directors are quite open and work in a collaborative way.
Sure.
And I think that is partly about design.
Yeah.
Because you work as a team. So I think employee ownership suits us as a design consultancy because it is collaborative. And if an idea, like the good idea, comes from someone who's a junior and it's still a good idea, then that person will have the agency to run with that idea.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think, maybe it's partly about the discipline and, also about the way we operate now. And we're very keen to emphasize team as opposed to individuals. And I think that's a really important part of our culture, of EO culture. This kind of work we do is never about one person. And unfortunately, design tends to focus around, a figurehead who, the genius who came up with the idea. The designs that we do, the work that we do, which is kind of big, complex projects, it's not about one person.
No.
It's about team, and it's about expertise. It's about working with our clients, and we have 5 values. Collaboration is one of those values, and that's they're key to how we work. So our 5 values are inclusive, sustainable, pragmatic, visionary, and collaborative.
Wow.
And we had buy-in from, so our values have existed for some time, kind of articulated, but a couple of years ago, we ensured that we kind of re-engaged the team, like from an employee ownership perspective, to say, are these still relevant to us? Do they still say what we all collectively believe? And what's really interesting is how embedded that language is when the team talk about what we do.
Right.
So I think they are really reflective and meaningful of the way we approach our work.
Amazing. I think we might have had a little companion joining our podcast.
No, I know.
Do you need to attend to him? Is he all right? Just one final question, and then I've got a few just rapid fire questions. There's been such a fascinating and amazing conversation, really helpful. One thing we haven't talked about is clients, and I know, well, we have a little bit just then, but I know for us, the fact that we're employee owned and therefore are going to be around for the future is, we're a financial planning business. We take someone on at 30 and they want them to be around for the future. I can only imagine in your firm, that must be a big plus for you as a EO business, is it not? Because the nature of your contracts, presumably, if you're working with the likes of Virgin and things, are multi-year contracts. Is that another big plus of being employee owned for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it shows, we've got longevity. We're going to be there for the long haul, but also many of our clients, there's a parallel with long-standing members of our team. They're also long-standing clients. So we have companies that we've worked with for kind of 20 years plus. And that's showing, our commitment to continuing our work with them.
Yeah. I imagined it could only be a big plus for you. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Anything, Kirsty, that you think we should have covered about the business or being employee-owned that we haven't covered? Any area that you think, why didn't we cover that might be helpful?
I'm not sure. This came into my mind earlier when we were talking about kind of the blur between operational kind of motivations as opposed to kind of just like cultural engagement. But we have had, I think when you widen the conversation to include more people, you kind of widen the pool of people who are enthusiastic to improve profitability, for example. I mean, we've got two really good examples of, we tried to, a couple of years ago, we kind of set out a challenge to reduce the amount of data storage we had.
Right.
So thinking both from a profitability perspective, how much we were paying for storage, but also from a sustainable perspective, how much energy we're, consuming in that regard. And that was like taken by the team and all like self, there were a number of people who took it upon themselves to like really motivate action around that. So that was a really good, because that's showing collaborative impact or for the whole team. And then we've also had similarly kind of self-motivated action around kind of creative education. So how much we engage with, schools, universities, and our kind of pipeline for future employees and graduates.
Right.
And that also creates in itself a really great culture for our, we have people who spend their year in industry with us, and then they come back to us when they graduate.
Right.
And so that's kind of perpetuating because they are equally invested in the next people who are coming. And that is really, really important part of our culture, because we feel like those people are, come to us and they stay with us.
Sure.
And they start their professional career with us. And that's really super valuable.
Yeah. Amazing.
And that makes, people also come back to us a lot. So they might leave for a bit for whatever reasons, but they often come back to us. And I think that is a lot about the culture.
Yeah. Amazing. So we've just got a few rapid fire questions towards the end of the podcast.
Yeah.
The first one is, finish the sentence. Employee ownership is
working collaboratively for the best shared outcome.
My biggest EO surprise was?
Actually, I should have talked about this. I don't know if it's a surprise, but to any EO business or anyone coming into the EO business space, you need to dedicate time to it. It's not something that you can do, like the culture stuff, the engagement. Don't think it will take no time, because I think I'm not sure that sounds very good, but
it's so important. I agree with you completely.
Because at the beginning, I feel like the founders probably thought it requires very little, time and effort. And it really, really requires a lot of dedicated time and effort. And being able to, so for example, for our trustee directors, being able to say X percentage of your time is dedicated to this work is so important. Yeah. And that it is seen by others as being important work. You can't do it as a side hustle. I don't think. You can do it, but I don't think it will be consistent. And I think consistency is also super, super important, as well as understanding that you are evolving and learning all the time, and you're not going to get it right. And as other people come into it and start to participate, like, you have employee owners who might be very light touch. You've got others who are super interested, some who might have very specific interest. But that makes the conversation rich and interesting, because you're rolling and making that is becoming different. It's not the same. You're not delivering the same all the time. So you might want, foundational pillars, whatever, of what you do, but actually it needs to flex and change.
Really well made point. And I completely agree. I think it's, people sometimes look at the same with B Corp as if it's some sort of tick in the box. And when you've done it, and you realize it's something you need to do every day, every week. And I think EO is exactly the same. I do a series of blogs on our website, EO Know-How, and I did one recently on transaction, transition, and transformation. The transaction's the easy bit. Then you move into transition, but actually it's transformation that you're looking at, and that comes over a period of time. So that's really helpful. I'm an avid reader. I've read quite a few books on employee ownership, but one book, a sort of businessy type book. I don't know if you're a book reader, Kirsty, but if you have, are there any books you particularly recommend that you've read over the last couple of years that has sort of inspired you around leadership or running a business or anything to?
I am a very big reader, but not particularly around business books. However, I did just read a book which was it's basically the sustainable design journey of a consultancy called Marama, by a woman called Jo Barnard, and it's a very good and quick read. But it demonstrates that we're learning all the time, and that perfect doesn't exist. I think that's another important part of the conversation I think that one has with one's employee owners, that you are learning together and you don't necessarily have all the answers, but you're all kind of trying your best to deliver the best.
Finally, CEO confessional. Okay, you have a choice here of 3. So the first one's a moment of honesty, a time when you made a significant mistake, a decision you regret, or a moment of self-doubt. That's number 1. Number 2 is an unfiltered story. You could tell a story about a difficult setback in your company, a time you had to fire someone you liked, or the third one, secret struggle, an opportunity to share a specific or often unspoken challenge that you faced. And that would be imposter syndrome or something like that. So any of those 3?
I don't know which it is. I can give you an answer. I think, and I'm not sure this is very EO specific necessarily.
Yes,
but I do think sometimes. Well, I suppose one thing I've learned is that you imagine that huge changes, like a significant person leaving, for example, and this is relevant to employee ownership, when founders leave, because one of our founders left the business to go and do his, move on and do his own business, his own next business.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That you think it will be ground shaking. And what I've learned is actually it's different. It becomes something different, but different doesn't necessarily need to be bad. And I feel like when significant people have left, I think you feel loss of that loss of that person, because everyone is individual. But again, the next person who comes into that role brings something different to it, brings a different experience and the role, or they help you go on on a different step on your journey, and you kind of go with the flow of that, or it doesn't need to be the end.
Sure.
I think.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have, really learned, through a number of different experiences. I'm recognizing that you can be sad at the loss of that individual from your daily life, but it was really good. Like what you did and what you built was great. And then the next person will bring something different, and it could be, equally great, but it will be different.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I completely echo that. I mean, you joined your company in 2001. I set up Paradigm Norton in 2001. So we've been on a sort of similar journey.
Twins.
And I would completely echo that. We've had some amazing people come through the business equally for a variety of reasons. We've lost some really good people, but you wish they hadn't gone, but life goes on, and the business sort of morphs and shapes as a result of losing people, and it equally allows other people to absolutely flourish. And I've seen, certainly in our business, people go from not really involved in clients to one of the team members here now leads a significant part of the business. And it's just been amazing to see as people have come and gone. Some people just really flourish in an amazing way. So
I think if there is one legacy of employee ownership and of good culture, is that when people leave, they take that with them and they go and they do that somewhere else. And that is success. That for me is like, have good culture so you can show good practice and people will think of you always like, that was a great experience.
Yeah.
I want to replicate that, or I want to take whatever I thought was good about that and do it in my own way, but that you are sowing seeds. So when people go on, essentially, I've always been a great believer in success breeds success, that they go on, but really feel part of like an extension of that practice or culture.
Yeah. No, I think that's so true. Yeah, we've had and thankfully, we don't lose lots of people, but sometimes people just think, actually, I'm just going to go and have a go at doing it myself. And there's a few people that have done that. And I look at what they're doing and I can see a little bit of Paradigm Norton in what they're doing in terms of the culture. Yeah. But amazing. They're doing different things. It's not what we're doing. They're serving a different client population, but hey, they're doing a great job and that's brilliant. So wonderful. Really appreciate your time. There's some real gems in there. Thank you for your honesty and sharing your sort of candid stories. I love the idea of EO just being a process, and actually it isn't that you're not doing box ticking. It's something that just evolves and flourishes, but you need to sort of give it time and things change. But it is that continuous journey. I think that's so important. So thank you so much. I'll leave you to your dog.
Thank you so much
for the rest of the day.